Garen, you're the president of Salient Realty, a full-service commercial real estate brokerage, and also CityRise Development. How do you handle rejection?
Well, you get used to it, I think. You do get a lot of no's. I try to, like on cold outreach, I'm not just like, hey, you want to sell your building? Like that usually doesn't go anywhere. We try to provide value to them to where it's not really, it's hard for them to say no because it's like, hey, we've got a comp that just sold that would be pretty applicable to you or whatever. Like we heard this project's happening with, that could affect your property. Would you like to know more?
The way I like to put it is the people we're buying from are maximizing their return on effort.
That's a great
not
way of
necessarily
putting
return on investment. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you have an extremely low basis, low debt, and you're in Florida for half the year, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to push rents. Garen, appreciate your time.
Raj, thanks.
You're the president of Salient Realty, a full-service commercial real estate brokerage, and also CityRise Development.
That's right.
A boutique development shop. Is that an accurate description?
I think so. I think we call ourselves that. I like it. It sounds good.
Yeah. Can you give me some background on Salient? Just, high level, where you are today, how long you've been in business?
Yeah. Salient Realty Group, like you said, full service commercial brokerage here in town, St. Louis. We really cover all asset types, but I think if you asked, I think people would say what they know us for are multifamily, probably sub-institutional type of stuff, and then also a lot of redevelopment, which gets into my background with historic tax credits from my dad and some other things. But that's kind of the areas we focus on, but we do everything. And we've got 8 guys now, started in 2017, have kind of been picking up guys over the last couple of years, and it's been good. It's been good.
For what it's worth, I'll say you specifically, but also a couple guys on your team are very aggressive on the buy side and the sales side. And I love to see it. And I think it's super impressive because you don't see a ton of that in St. Louis or a market like St. Louis. I think, if I say, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z type of property, you'll usually come up with something.
We try. This market's starting to shake loose a little bit. It seems like I know you guys are starting to find some things, but for the past 18 months, it's been a little slow. So we try to really get specific with what clients are looking for, and we'll do a deal soon.
Yeah, yeah, we will.
But yeah, no, thank you. That means a lot. We try to really listen and then go out there and pound the pavement and see what we can find. And we do a lot of off-market stuff, do a lot of on-market, but it's always fun looking. We like finding deals.
And I'm glad you mentioned that we haven't done a deal because we've probably looked at 8 deals you've sent us maybe, and they just weren't a fit for whatever reason. And that still hasn't stopped you from sending us deals. So I do appreciate that. But I think it also just speaks to the culture you're building over there. You're sending stuff to potential clients. You're working on behalf of the clients you're representing, no matter what. Like no personal feelings are involved, and to me at least, it doesn't feel like you feel like it's time wasted if we don't buy a deal you send us.
Yeah. Well, a guest you previously had, Kyle Howerton, told me the second best answer besides yes is a quick no. So we're always happy to send deals, and you've been responsive and everything. So we'll find something, and it'll be out there pretty soon, hopefully. But yeah. Yeah. Even
in a slow market, you guys are pumping out listings. I think you're one of the more active multifamily brokers in city limits. Is there something in particular you would attribute that to? Like, is it just the willingness to make calls or, knock on doors, or is there, without giving away, the secret sauce, is there one thing you would point to and say, hey, that's why we're having a lot of success today, even in a difficult market?
Well, I think it is the effort and cold outreach. That stuff plays a super important role. It's funny because, we started in 2017. At that time, no one knew who we were. I started the company. It was fresh. I had a little bit of name recognition through, my dad who has a consulting business. So that helped. But, every time I'd have a call with somebody or, I'd have to say, this is who we are. And they're like, who's that? And so only in the last couple of years has it really been like, oh, you're the Salient guys. Like, yeah. So it's like, it's been nice to kind of get that. But I think, we are pretty aggressive in trying to find deals out there. And I think we're starting to get that, we do a lot in the city. We do a lot in the county too. But I think people are starting to see that. We've had some good sales, like from a comp perspective, that got people's attention, and so all that kind of builds, and they know we're active, so it all kind of compounds to that.
Makes sense. On the development side, what is CityRise doing, or what have you done previously?
CityRise is it's a 50-50 partnership with my dad, which is great. Sometimes family businesses, people are like, ooh, that sounds like it could be dicey, but it's been fantastic. He's a great partner. We work well together. We develop stuff. It's usually stuff that's smaller than the brokerage work that we tend to do or the consulting work that we do, but it primarily is in the Grove neighborhood of St. Louis. We take kind of smaller historic buildings. We love buildings that need the most work possible because that helps with tax credits and everything. So we'll take small multifamily buildings, mixed-use buildings, which I love mixed-use buildings. Not everybody does, but we love them. And we renovate them, try to go high-end finishes with them, and then hold them and lease them out. So that's what we do. I think we've done 10 buildings now. Currently we have, depends on who's valuing it today. I would say it's probably close to 7 million, but somewhere 6.5 to 7 in the portfolio up in the Grove, and it's been fun. We've learned a ton. We do all of our GC work ourselves, and I think that really helps with brokerage too. It helps you think like an owner, knowing what people want to see in apartments and what value add plays actually work. So I think that's been a really nice learning point and helping us be better brokers. But yeah, so that's what we do. We own or operate them ourselves.
That's awesome. How long have you been active in the Grove?
We bought our first building, which is our office building, in September 2016. So that project, we really didn't start construction for like at least 6 months, but I think we finished it in 2018. So we moved in 2018 and then have slowly been buying more stuff there. It's nice. Everything happens to be within a 2-block walk from our office. So it's hard to scale, but we do really like that because you can just, if you need something, you walk down the street. Makes it easy.
The Grove is, I would classify it as like an up and coming neighborhood. I don't know if you would, or if you would say it's already transitioned into what it is today. When you started in 2016, was it a stable neighborhood at that time? I'm, primarily in the suburbs. I haven't paid a lot of attention to the city until more recently. So What was the Grove like in 2016 versus today?
So going a little bit further back than that, I worked for my dad's company in the summers as I would just do really random stuff that he needed done. And so,
were you cutting grass at any point?
I didn't cut. Actually, yes, I did.
Okay.
I did cut some grass. And so that I did check that box. But one of the first things that I remember doing when I was maybe like a freshman in college is he needed to have like some storefront in the Grove painted. And this would have been like 2009 or 8 or 10 maybe. The Grove was rough back then. Okay. And it had just started to get a little bit better, but it was pretty rough back then. And I remember we were like priming a storefront, which like I'm not a good painter, so like probably looked horrible, but it was just a primer, so it didn't really matter. And people were yelling at us and like throwing stuff at us, and so I was like nervously painting the storefront, and so I remember being like nervous about the neighborhood. Fast forward to 2016, I think things had started to pick up. WashU got pretty involved, so things were getting better. When we bought our first building, you always kind of sometimes feel like you're overpaid for something. And so at the time we thought we overpaid for the building, but the neighborhood had improved. It felt stabilized. But since then, I feel like the neighborhood has just been on a really great trajectory and has grown a lot. I think it's still growing. It feels like it. Like rents are growing pretty good. Having Cortex there with Barnes and WashU, it feels like it's still got a good trajectory. But I would say it's growing still. But I think some people would tell you it's kind of like you've kind of missed that initial ramp up maybe at this point in time.
I think it's one of the cooler parts of town. And if you're not from St. Louis, my recommendation to people is usually you need to go to the different neighborhoods and the different municipalities around the city, and of course downtown as well, but you definitely need to go to the neighborhoods, and the Grove is one of those neighborhoods. I think that's worth checking out.
St. Louis is funny. It's like it's very pockety, which is a funny word, but it's like you got all these different cool little neighborhoods. One thing I wish was better is that everything was more connected and walkable. But yeah, I think the Grove's one of them. I'm biased, obviously, but it's good. It's walkable, and you got a lot of cool restaurants and coffee shops and things like that. So we like it.
You mentioned being biased, so you're a St. Louis guy. Can
Yeah.
you give us some background on how you grew up, where you grew up, and maybe your first taste of entrepreneurship, with which it sounds like is through your dad?
Yeah, grew up in St. Louis. I played sports, so I don't know, just like probably everybody else. My dad has a consulting business for the people listening that deals with historic tax credits, environmental tax credits, and some environmental services, and just like capital stack services for real estate developers. So I kind of, as I was growing up, I would hear those conversations, and they didn't really register because I just wanted to play basketball, at the time. I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention, but so he had that business. I would hear about that. And so that was always, starting a business seemed kind of natural just because he had done that with some other things in his past too. So we always would talk about that. But yeah, love St. Louis, as a kid. I grew up in the county, and we would go to the city for baseball games and stuff like that. Like that was the big draw for us to go there. So until I started, when I moved back from grad school and we moved our offices there, like the city is awesome. Like there's so many cool things going on. We get some bad headlines, which I get clicks, for the media, but there's some really cool stuff going on, and it's just an awesome place to work. Like there's so much history. Like I love historic buildings, and it's just it's a great spot. I love St. Louis. Big fan.
I'm a big fan as well. You mentioned basketball. So how long did you play basketball for? And then also, given the fact that St. Louis doesn't have an NBA team today, do you have a favorite team or anything like that?
Man, I have not kept up with it. Basketball kind of feels like a different life ago. I think I started playing in middle school, played in high school, did decently well, ended up walking on at Liberty University. And I walked on my freshman year, got burned out, walked on my senior year. So it was like a bookend, which is bizarre, but that's what happened. But I don't know if I have a favorite NBA team. I'm a LeBron James fan.
Okay.
Everybody, you probably just lost like half the audience or maybe more than that. But like, I just love watching him dominate still. So,
okay. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but Michael Jordan or LeBron James, who's the better player?
The Michael Jordan documentary that came out on Netflix, I probably would have said LeBron James before that, but then watching that, because growing up, I kind of caught the tail end of Jordan's career.
Sure.
But I'd probably say Michael. But it's close. It's close. So for what that's worth. What about you?
I would say Michael Jordan, but I think that was a safe answer, the way you put it.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
And I would imagine a lot of the folks that we deal with are on the Michael Jordan side. Maybe in a few years it'll be.
It might switch. It's fun to watch LeBron. I mean, he's got the scoring title now. I mean, it's just going to keep growing. I don't think that'll ever get broken. But anyways, we digress.
Yeah, so back to real estate.
Yeah.
It sounds like your passion for real estate, entrepreneurship really came through the exposure you got, working with your dad. Is that fair to say? And if so, what is it about real estate that really gets you excited? And you're allowed to say it's tangible.
Yeah, right. The common answer. Yeah. So what's funny is it did come through my dad, I think. And I've always liked it. Like I thought I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid. That's just what I would say, but I didn't even know what that really meant at the time. But when I moved back from grad school, I did not want to go work for my dad. And because he was in the real estate thing, and I was just like, I need to do something else. He finally lured me into his company, which I'm grateful for because it's been fantastic, and wouldn't have it any other way looking back. But we started together a solar energy company, so we would install solar on like projects of his that he had clients doing deals on. And so that was how I got into his company. It was kind of like a sideway in, I guess, and I agreed to do it, and it was fun. But I really never wanted to be on the real estate side of things. We would do these projects, and I think what maybe got me interested is we would, I've mentioned historic tax credits several times, but that's what we would work on. So we would help developers like take an old school building or a warehouse downtown or something, convert it to apartments. And we found that when you get historic tax credits, we found a way to get the state to approve the solar installation, the solar panels to be installed on the building. And so not only did you get some rebates and other things, you would get these historic tax credits, which was an additional 25% off the cost. So like these deals were, it would make, you'd be paying back like a couple months after getting the tax credits. So it was a no-brainer for a lot of developers. And so what got me into real estate is, I would show a potential client like the payback on these solar panels, and then they'd say, that's great. But really the big benefit I'm seeing is I'm going to reduce my common expenses for like our common electric meter. And that's going to multiply my value by whatever cap rate they would use. And I didn't even really know what that meant at the time, but they would be like, I'm going to pay for this system 3 to 5 times over just because of the reduced expenses, translating into a higher value. And I was like, that seems interesting that, and then so I would start to, ease over to the real estate side. And so this is a very long answer, but
no worries.
Working with my dad through that, seeing how those real estate deals worked and how all these developers put things together finally got me intrigued. And I was like, maybe I do actually want to be on the real estate side. So that was kind of like the first introduction and learning how to model deals and how all these incentives come in and putting them on a pro forma. That's when I started really ramping up on the real estate side.
I will say, personally, it was a big light bulb moment as well when you're looking at, let's say, an apartment community or something else as a business, but then you realize hey, if I can increase the revenue or decrease the expenses, and then this is the impact it's going to have on the building value.
Right.
That was a real light bulb moment for myself as well.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not in the commercial real estate world, it's something that doesn't come naturally to think about it that way.
Right.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Just going to the historic tax credits you were mentioning, clearly, your father and yourself have a lot of experience there. I think that's a world that a lot of folks don't understand clearly unless they're in it, kind of like what we were talking about with commercial real estate in general. Can you expand on just the process for obtaining historic tax credits and usually, what that looks like? Are developers acquiring those and then selling them to banks, or is that, not the typical process? That's my general understanding.
I think that happens all the time. I think as quickly as I can say it and simply, you have to have an eligible building, which most of St. Louis is. There's pockets that aren't, but a lot of, if it's a historic building in a historic district, it's usually eligible. And so you buy a building like this, you're going to usually have a big construction piece because they usually need a lot of rehab or something like that. There's a federal tax credit program, historic tax credit program, and a state historic tax credit program. For the state, you got to spend 50% of your basis in the project. And for the federal, you got to spend 100%. Most of the time when you're converting an old warehouse to apartments, you blow that out of the water, so it's no problem at all. But you get, on the state side, you get 25% back as a tax credit that you can sell after you receive it. It's transferable is what they call it. You can sell it to banks, buy it, accounting firms buy them, individuals, if they're large enough, buy those tax credits. So you usually get 90, we've gotten as high as 93 cents on the dollar for those. And so that comes in as cash, you can use that to pay down your construction loan and convert to permanent at that point. And then on the federal side, it's a little more complicated, but you get a 20% tax credit. And that is now earned, the rules have changed, but that's now earned over 5 years. So 4% each year for 5 years. And that is not transferable. So it's got to flow up through the ownership percentages. You can bring in federal investors that inject cash. It's a little more complicated. That's the basics of it, and makes economics work on historic buildings. A lot of people think, these programs just get developers rich. And it's historic rehabs costs almost as much as new construction, sometimes more, just because of what's required to, how the masonry is and stuff like that. So they're very necessary. Otherwise, I don't think a lot of St. Louis would be preserved the architecture how it has. So that's my simple. I don't know if that was very simple, but that's my simple answer.
It was not as simple as you think, but it was pretty simple. So if I understand correctly,
Sorry.
You're buying a building for, let's say, $1 million.
Yes.
If you're going to spend at least $1 million renovating,
Yes.
then you can apply for the state and federal tax credits.
Yeah. So if you buy a building for $1 million, you got to spend at least $1 million to get the federal, and and 500,000 would qualify you for the state, essentially.
And
so
then the federal was 20%. Is that right?
Federal's 20%.
State was
25%.
25. So like that state 25%. So call it 250,000.
Yep.
You can sell that to a bank potentially for like 90 cents on the dollar, and then put that towards the renovation or the loan or whatever.
It offsets cost
Sure.
is another way to think of it. But
Sure.
yes, that's correct. And then 20%. So on $1 million, you get 200 grand back as a federal tax credit. Some people use them if they on a smaller scale project, but you can get a federal investor to come in and pay you for those. So that's how it works. It's a great program. It, like any government program, there's red tape and there's consultants, which is a business. But I think that it is a great tool for developers to use if you have a historic building that you're looking at.
I would agree with that. And I also agree with your point about the costs of doing a historic renovation. I also don't think any of those projects happen without these types of programs.
Yeah.
Because it's not only the cost, the brain damage.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to go and build new versus, doing the work to preserve some of these beautiful old buildings.
Yeah. It's funny because my whole world has been in the historic, redevelopment side. So like that, I tend to think that's easier because I just don't know that much about new construction. So, but I know what you mean. It's like new construction, everything's, optimized to fit, it's just you build it the right dimensions so that everything works. In old buildings, it's like you have weird angles and stuff, and you gotta know what you're doing or have a good architect or a general contractor to help you not go crazy over budget. So,
and the scale factor, you can scale with new development, I think, a lot easier because every project can more or less look the same if you want it to.
Yeah, template, right.
And with the redevelopments, I doubt any two projects are going to look the exact same.
That's a great point. Yeah, that does make it hard. So I think all of this to say those tax credit programs are very necessary, and not just like a way to get developers rich. It actually it's necessary to keep the historic fabric of our buildings intact. So, yeah.
So a lot of what Salient does is selling some of these beautiful old buildings, whether they're renovated or not. It's not all you guys do, but I would guess maybe like 40% of your listings are some of the older assets.
Yeah.
Can you expand on exactly what types of product Salient specializes in? Is it multifamily 40 to 80 units? Is it, the industrial and multifamily? Just kind of give us an idea of what you specialize in as a company. And then if you don't mind as well, I'd love to hear about how you've been growing your team. You mentioned you have 8 folks on the team now. I think one of them is your brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Tim.
So aside from, friends and family, how have you been going about building the culture? But first, just the product. What are you guys focused on?
What we work on. I think, now that we've got more guys, there's some guys that are focusing on different things, but I think overall we tend to be in the multifamily space. That's like probably what we do the most of. I would say, like I said, sub-institutional. So we'll do anything from, call it 10 units on the smaller end of things, maybe even a little bit smaller depending on the deal, up to 100, 150 depending on the deal. So that seems to be where we fit in really nicely, or that it felt like when I was starting the company, there was this kind of gap where it was like, you've got the big national firms that take those institutional listings, which is great. And it was hard for me to compete with those because they're like, hey, who are you? And it's like, I'm Salient, but nobody knew that at the time. So, and then on the smaller, like 2s and 4s, it's like residential realtors, which is fine. But like, there was this hole where it was like, you didn't get the professional marketing. It wasn't super sophisticated. And these are general statements, but that's just kind of the hole that I found. And so our approach has been to do really great marketing. I think we do a good job of that. and just provide a really professional approach to that and in that sub-institutional space. And I think it's worked out well. That's kind of the pocket that we found we work really well in. So multifamily, we do a lot of that. And then, like you said, redevelopment stuff. And then on the growth of the company, I really haven't advertised like, hey, we're hiring or anything like that. We've just had, Tim McCarthy joined first, like maybe a year and a half in from when I started, and he's done a great job. And just after that, we just had some guys reach out and we'd see if they were a fit culture-wise. And it's just kind of grown. I guess you'd call that word of mouth. Like people are just reaching out and saying, hey, would you consider hiring us? And some we have.
Okay.
so that's just how it's grown. It really hasn't been, in the brokerage business, it's hard to, if you bring too many people on and they're fresh, like you're training so much. I would never have time to even focus on anything that I'm working on. So it's kind of you got to grow strategically and not just like dump a bunch of bodies and desks and hope they find deals to work on. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's been a little slower. Yeah, in that sense.
Makes sense. So if someone's working with you or Tim or someone else on the team, I think you've referred to Salient as like a one-stop shop. So what can they expect? What is the Salient experience look like? Are you consulting with them on, of course, value, but maybe what they can do to maximize value, or are you doing more of that kind of work on the buy side? Can you just expand on the services?
I think that it depends a little bit on the deal. Like if it's a redevelopment deal, I think that's when we really can provide a ton of value, where we can provide the historic tax credit consulting. We can offer ideas on the value add. I think that goes back to where we develop our own buildings and stuff like that. I think that really provides a expertise to help guide clients and maximize what value they can have. Or even if they don't want to do the work, we can, in our offering memorandums, lay out some strategies. So I think that's a really nice piece that we can offer. On a more multifamily approach, usually most of the deals we have some value add component. Like relatively rarely do we sell like a true stabilized deal. It just seems like that there's, in that sub-institutional space, you just have like a less, not sophisticated, but you just don't have that institutional owner that's like maximizing every cent on rent already. So you're just buying like a true cap rate deal. We've always usually got we're below market rents, or you can do X, Y, and Z and increase the value. So I think we kind of just offer some expertise in that scenario. Just
for the record, we buy in exactly that space, the sub-institutional space.
Yes.
So the way I like to put it is the people we're buying from are maximizing their return on effort.
That's a great
not
way
necessarily
of putting
return on investment. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you have an extremely low basis, low debt, and you're in Florida for half the year, there's nothing wrong with not wanting to push rents. And
that's a great. If I steal it, I'll give you credit. I will give you credit, I promise. But that's a perfect way of describing that, because that's really what it is. Because you've got people that bought stuff, or it got passed down through their family, and it's like it cash flow is great because like they just don't want to have to go in and drive rents because they like, there's just so many reasons. But that's perfectly what it is. It's like for the effort, they're getting a great return, but there's usually a couple more steps that someone like yourself or another, operator can go in and really, take advantage of.
On the buy side, what are you seeing like in terms of the types of buyers for these assets? Like in my opinion, it's probably all local groups, but are you seeing like out-of-state investors and things like that? What's the typical buyer profile look like?
It's a great question. I think, in that sub-institutional space, 100 units or less, it is, I'd say we probably have 60-ish% out-of-state people.
Wow. Okay.
I would say that's probably pretty accurate on most of our deals. I mean, it's close to half, but I think it's over half for sure. Just like institutional investors, they like the yields here in the Midwest. They like the stability, which Austin and Phoenix were awesome a couple years ago. And now the Midwest is shining because we're very stable and have some, steady growth. So people like that. And I would say we've actually seen some institutional level people looking at under 100 units because I think, 2023 was a very slow year for just about everybody. There's just very few deals that were happening compared to the year before. And so we've started to see some institutions step down into that space. They usually want to be on the higher end of that, like call it, 50 on the low end to 100, is what they really would look for. But we have seen more institutional players starting to look at smaller unit counts. And then there's the local groups as well that are interested in that. But that's kind of the rough spectrum there.
Sure. And the local groups are like the Jareds and the Kyles of the world.
The Jareds
right?
and the Kyles.
Okay.
Yes, great guys, and have enjoyed working with both those guys. So
Okay.
I think, there's, St. Louis is a small world in St. Louis. And so there's a lot of everybody kind of knows the players, especially as things have, activity has contracted. There's just fewer buyers that are out there still, that aren't sidelined. So everybody kind of knows the folks. But I do think that we have seen a lot of outside groups, and those are usually the ones that are willing to pay. Sellers usually want a higher price, and there's, this price expectation gap right now. And the local guys tend to be on the lower end of that. And it's the out of town people that I tend to find that are willing to pay that, probably because they haven't seen the deal, a couple of years ago sell for a lot lower. And so they don't have that bias.
Yeah. Yeah. And it could go both ways. They could be right or they could be wrong. Like they could be wrong in overvaluing it,
Sure.
or the locals could be wrong and we may be anchoring ourselves into pricing that is no longer relevant.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see how it plays out. But either way, the stuff you sell, the stuff in the city or the county, it's all, in my opinion, pretty safe because there's nothing in St. Louis that's trading at a basis to where someone can easily build the same exact thing next door the next day.
Right.
And the yield is there day one, usually. So I tend to tell people St. Louis is safer than your Phoenix, Denver, Austin, whatever, because we don't have that insane competition and that insane supply pipeline that you see in places like that.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of cap rates or just the type of yield that buyers are kind of solving for today?
Cap rates on value add stuff is so hard to put in there. So you're almost looking more at yield on cost, I guess, is what I would say. But I mean, because we've sold, I think the lowest cap rate I've ever sold, which makes no sense from you wouldn't buy it based on this cap rate. But I think I've sold 2 caps before, but it's because rents were low, whatever. That was the going in cap rate. But I think just as an overall, if there was a stabilized deal, sub-institutional, it's a big range, but it depends on all the normal factors that everybody would look at. I think you're anywhere from, for really nice product in good locations, 6 on the low end of things, and then up to 8+, depending on where you are. If it's a little bit rougher area that demands a higher cap, that's kind of where it would be. And I think on a value add, if you're looking for yield on cost, I think people are wanting to get to at least over 8, on a yield on cost on most deals that we see. But it also goes that sub-institutional space is a little bit of a tricky spot from a debt perspective, because you're dealing with a lot of local or regional banks, and rates are, 7 if you're lucky, 7.25 if you're kind of lucky.
I think today they've gone up recently. So I think today you're in the high 7s if you're with a local bank. Yeah,
there's been it's relationships help you get down. So we've seen some people get 7.25 recently. But if you just go to a bank, especially if you're an out of town guy coming in, you're going to get quoted 8% probably for sure. But so that's a high interest. You got negative leverage going in usually right away. And then it's some of those deals are either not stabilized enough to get into agency, or they're too small and it just doesn't make sense. So that's the hard part of that sub-institutional space for me is finding the right debt for that. And Freddie Mac, small balance is a really great program, but you kind of have to have a stabilized deal, or you got to be able to fund, improvements out of pocket. So that's the tricky part in that sub-institutional space, is finding the right debt product to help. And that's why I think cap rates in that space are elevated compared to more institutional stuff, where you can get more stabilized and agency debt that works. So
the debt comment is, I think, extremely important, because to give you an example, we're under contract on 2 deals. On one, our rate's 7.2. We're closing in about a week and a half because of the relationship,
Gotcha.
like you mentioned. On the other, our rate's going to be 7.5. But the quotes we were getting from banks were anywhere from like that 7.2 to 8, maybe even slightly over 8.
Yeah.
It's all relationships,
Yeah.
but then also every bank is all over the place today.
Yeah.
It's not like the agencies where you more or less know what you're going to get.
Right.
When you're talking to a potential buyer and, if they're from out of state, I'm sure there's an education piece where you're educating them on St. Louis. How does that education look like? Are they usually coming in with some familiarity, or do you have to break it down for them in terms of, hey, this is, the city only makes up 10% of the metro area. Right. Within the city, if you're looking for B product, you want to be in these neighborhoods, or what kind of knowledge are they coming into St. Louis with, generally speaking?
Yeah, it's a mixed range of everything. I think the people that are reaching out, from a baseline perspective, are interested in the city. Otherwise, they wouldn't be reaching out. So that's a good starting point. The people that have preconceived notions about it, being difficult or whatever, crime in downtown, they usually don't reach out. So we usually are starting off on like a good base, and then from there, if they're out of town and they're looking at a deal that we're presenting to the market, like if they're coming in town, like I do driving tours with a lot of people from out of town, and just cruise all over, whatever targeted, parts. And I just tell them what's going on, stuff that we've worked on, stuff that we know is in the pipeline. Cause a lot of that stuff doesn't make the headlines. It's like, we get the negative headlines, as I mentioned. And so that's what you see in the media, but like there's great projects all over, the city, downtown, like stuff's happening that's good. So I do like to educate that, cause I like to fight through the bad headlines that you see online and stuff. But then we just, we talk about St. Louis because it is very location dependent, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in a certain area or not. You just need to know what works in a certain spot. So I try to ask questions about how they're set up and what their expectations are, and then that kind of allows me to say, hey, this is probably the area that fits what you're looking for, and we kind of target those spots.
That makes sense. And I'm sure they appreciate that. It's not every day that you meet somebody that is, extremely busy and successful and is going to take time out of their day to give you a personal tour of, the market you want to invest in. Yeah. I think that's pretty awesome.
I probably can't do it for every single person that calls, but like, if it's a serious thing, and they show serious interest and they're making a big commitment to come out to view something, I think it is great. It's a boots on the ground type of feel, and you get some local knowledge. I think those are really beneficial.
Mm-hmm. What's the most interesting project that you've either worked on and sold, or maybe that you have coming up?
We have one coming up, which I think we talked about off air for a little bit. That's going to be really neat, and it's just like I can't share many details on it yet. Some of the cooler stuff that I've worked on, helped a developer out of Kansas City buy a ton of ground in downtown West. And so we did a bunch of assemblage work for him, and he was going to develop stuff. COVID happened, kind of,
Are you able to say the name?
Abbott Properties.
Okay.
Yeah, Matt Abbott.
I read about that.
Yeah, great guy. Love Matt. He's got awesome vision, and learned a ton from Matt. He's an awesome client. But so we helped him and his brothers assemble a bunch of ground up there, and before the stadium was announced. So that was to his credit, some good vision and good fortune. We bought some stuff that was under where the stadium is now. Wow. So that was good for him. And so we've got 2 city blocks that are available, which is like really unique because I think that's like 5.33 acres, which like in the city, you go out to the county and you can find big bulks of land, but in the city, it's hard to find contiguous big parcels of land. So we've actually got those under contract just recently. So there's some cool plans there that I think will happen. Depending on when this airs, I hope it's still moving forward. You never know in this market, but everything looks good. Yeah. And it's funny on like the redevelopment side, when we list those sites, it's cool to list those, but then like the main project cost and development happens after we get involved. So like Kyle Howerton's got a really cool project from some ground or some buildings and ground that we sold him in downtown West. So like, that's a really cool one. I can't wait to see him get that going. So those are two things. I don't know, in that downtown West neighborhood. It's just been fun with the stadium going in. It's just been really cool to see that neighborhood start to get a lot of buzz.
And that neighborhood may be renamed soon, right?
Yes, I only heard about it right before it got announced in the Business Journal, but City Commons is the name I heard they're going with, and I've heard mixed reviews about the thoughts on the name. But I think it's a great idea to unify that, because I think that needs an identity. Downtown West works, but I think that's just like, it just doesn't feel as unified, as a name. So I think City Commons is a really good thing to get that, like, an identity for that neighborhood built around the stadium.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If you were to make an estimate, like let's say 10 years from now, what neighborhoods in the city would you say are the ones that changed the most for the better 10 years from now?
That's a great question. I think downtown West is the most obvious one. It happens to have some of these sites that are available, which allow for really big scale projects to happen. So I think that's like where you, like, if you were visiting St. Louis today and you drove through downtown West and then you left and you didn't come back on a trip for like 10 years, like you said, I think that neighborhood is going to look really different. The skyline of that will look a lot different with some projects that are in the works and that will happen. So I think that's the easiest answer. I think the Grove's still growing pretty good. Not a ton of land there to do larger stuff, but I just think that neighborhood overall continues to improve really well. And South County is a tough market to get into, but so I think that's might not be a ton of change, but I think that's a really good one if you can get into South County, especially on the multifamily side. That's one that's got really good, fundamentals right there. So
I'm slightly disappointed you didn't say downtown, and that's not like a knock on you or anything.
Yeah.
I think it's just the overall sentiment of a lot of people in the region right now. It feels like downtown it doesn't have a clear path forward just yet.
I think that's true, and it's sad to say that. I mean, we do a ton of brokerage work down there, and it's not to say that I don't think anything's happening. Stuff is, and I think there's a lot of cool, exciting stuff, and like there's some like sales tax reports that, because we do some leasing too, so we get involved with some retail leasing. There's some sales tax reports that are actually showing like really big year-over-year increases, which is really
that's great to hear.
So like you don't hear about that, and like hotel revenue has gone up. So there's all these good things happening, but to your point, I don't think there's a real unified driving group. That there's people trying, and I think there's certain groups that are doing a good job, but I think that we do need to get our heads together and commit to doing that, because I think downtown's crucial to helping the region grow. So, and
there are, like you said, a lot of folks that are trying their best, but it would be great if we could somehow bring everyone together. Like you have Brian Mingus doing a lot of work in the Landing, and you have, of course, whatever the Cardinals have planned for, Ballpark Village and stuff like that. And then you have Oliver Properties on Washington Avenue, and some other folks there as well. So some of the pieces are there, just some more unity. Maybe this is a joke, so not to offend anyone, but maybe we should change the name to Downtown Commons.
There you go. Yeah, right. And I'll be clear on downtown. I didn't say downtown because in my mind I was picturing more like visual change. So I think there's that site, those sites in downtown West allow for towers to be built, as opposed to where downtown the rehabs happen, but you don't, as you drive through, you don't actually necessarily notice those because it's, the buildings are already existing.
Yeah.
So that's primarily why, because I really do love that. I want to be clear. I love downtown.
Yeah,
I'm a big bull. I think like we're on the way up as opposed to continuing going down. That's my personal feeling. And there's some unbelievable value downtown. Like the basis on some of those buildings, like Alex is getting, it's a contrarian bet, but like it's hard to lose right now with some of the value you can get downtown for updated buildings, like that were fully renovated in the 2000s. So it's like vintage is a big deal right now. I know you're like, that's a thing for you guys too. And so yes, it's an older building, but if everything's been updated in 2000s, like, and you're buying stuff for $50 or $60 a foot, like That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's hard to go wrong on that.
It's the urban center of the 21st largest metro area in the United States of America.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I find it hard to believe you're going to lose buying at 50 or 60 a square foot.
Yeah. It's I think I'm biased because we list properties down there. We have stuff listed right now. So it's always hard when you're the listing broker. No one takes you too seriously when you make your sales pitch, but I do think that there is some incredible value downtown that people should pay attention to. And if you want to learn more, we'd love to talk to you about it. But I think that's a good place for people to look. You just gotta know what you're getting into, and you gotta just know some of the challenges. But then I think there's some upside for people.
I think you need to be, if we're talking apartments, you have to be a great operator, and you just have to be a little patient.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. You do have to be a little patient because there's, vacancy's not the best, or occupancy is not the best right now. But if you can be patient and get it at the right basis and wait, it's just hard to imagine it can, going down from here, in my opinion. So something for people to look at.
We talked about some of the larger scale developments that you've been a part of, and on the brokerage side, on the development side with some of your smaller scale projects. Do you have a project that kind of stands out that you can just kind of walk us through, maybe high level, and maybe we'll get in the weeds on some parts of it, but from start to finish, what a small scale redevelopment project might look like from your end?
Yeah, it's fun for us. I mean, I think the general approach that we've taken is, we take on a larger project that we're providing consulting or whatever for, tax credits and capital stack. We've kind of taken that and put it onto a smaller scale, project, which most people don't do because of the brain damage and like you're hiring consultants, but because we are used to doing that work, it kind of works for us. So, I think our office building, which is at Newstead and Shoto in the Grove, it's like a 9,000 square foot building. We bought it for $300,000. I think we bought it in September. And I think had we not bought it and started stabilizing it by this next spring, we would have possibly lost the building. It was in that rough a shape. So it was like, it wasn't just a gut, like people say gut rehab and you tear off the, plaster and you get down to the studs. This was like, we're rebuilding floors, like you're rebuilding structure, like roof was like blowing in the wind. Like it was, you see up and you could look straight up to the sky. So it was like a heavy value add.
A lot of tuck pointing.
And so we GC'd that, and that was like my first time really doing that. And my dad was involved, so he helped, and that was great because otherwise I would have been like, what am I doing? No idea. But so we did that project in 2016, finished in 2018. I think all in we spent like close to 1.2 or 1.3 on like construction costs. I think we ended up getting close to $300,000 in state tax credits, historic tax credits, and $250,000 on federal. So it's a great deal. We got tax abatement on it, so we applied for tax abatement. So we brought in a federal investor to monetize those federal tax credits, which is not typical for a small deal because there's usually tons of brain damage and lawyer costs and everything. But because we had the relationships, it worked. And so it was super successful. We turned it into 5 like really high-end apartments. And then we were going to take a larger like storefront as our office, but we ended up finding a tenant that wanted that. So we're like, we'll cram into the back and take a small space. And so we've got a smoothie shop, Hello Juice. Great awesome spot if you guys are looking for smoothies, and they got some really good food now too. So that's a great spot. And then we're in the back, crammed in a small space, and most of Salient's in the basement. So it feels like a startup still because it's like, small, beginnings, but we're needing new offices soon. So
what would you say the biggest like lesson you learned there was? I know you kind of touched on the construction and stuff like that, but was there any one lesson that you'd take and apply to your next deals or have taken?
It's probably just like a very overarching theme where like every deal, I'm sure just like stuff that you've worked on too, like there's a lot of obstacles, like our budget, like when you get into historic rehabs, like we talked about earlier, like you don't really know the cost until you start digging into it. And it's like, things are usually worse than they appear from the outside. So, we would have like huge budget problems, like everything was getting blown out. And it's like, you gotta keep fighting through it and find ways to make deals work. And so I think just being persistent and being creative and not giving up, like that's really what I learned there. Like there's a ton of like technical knowledge, a lot of technical knowledge I learned on just how to general contract and how to make like the project work. But the overarching theme was just like, don't just take the first like piece of adversity and just be like, this deal's done. Like I'm going to get out of it and sell and try to get my money back. It's like, no, let's plug in and find a creative solution to make this thing work. So that's probably the answer I'd give.
So it sounds like being relentless, and that also applies to the brokerage side as well.
Yeah, I think so. A brokerage, you get a lot of no's. So if you take the first no, you're making some cold calls, and I mean, you get 99 no's to 1 yes or whatever the ratio is. You got to have thick skin and just move on to the next thing and fight through it. So yeah, very applicable for brokerage.
How do you handle rejection, like the no's? Like you said, a lot of people might take that personally if you don't have thick skin or whatever the case is. How do you handle it? Do you just not even think about it, or
you get used to it? I think
Okay.
So I've been doing it long enough now where you get used to it, and I think you do get a lot of no's. I try to like on cold outreach. I'm not just like, hey, you want to sell your building? Like that usually doesn't go anywhere. We try to provide value to them to where it's not really. It's hard for them to say no because it's like, hey, we've got a comp that just sold that would be pretty applicable to you or whatever. Like we heard this project's happening with, that could affect your property. Would you like to know more? So I think that kind of negates the no hang up there because it intrigues people. So I think that's like the big thing from my perspective and what I try to teach our younger guys. Like you got to add value because if you can add value, people will listen and hear you. So, but even with that, you still get people that like stop calling me. And so you just learn to have thick skin and, the next one might say yes. So
I appreciate you sharing that. I think the adding value is like universal in any business.
Sure.
If you're truly looking to add value to customers, clients, whatever the case is, you're going to, at some point, become successful. As long as you're looking to add value every step of the way. And it sounds like you guys are. And from my experience in dealing with you, you've been truly trying to add value, bringing us deals that fit with what we're looking to buy. And I do appreciate that. We like to end the show. We've been talking for an hour, close to an hour.
I went fast.
Yeah. We like to end the show with what we call the hole-in-one. Just your greatest piece of advice that you can give someone that they can implement in either their life or business today. Do you have anything you can share with us?
It's a great question. I think what I would say is, it's probably cliche, and I'm sure other people have maybe said something along the same lines, but I think that you got to find something passionate because anything you choose in life, any business that you choose, like nothing's easy. Like there's going to be challenges. So like if you don't find something that you're passionate about, like it's much harder to put in that grind to get through and push things forward. So follow passion, but also you got to make sure that you can earn a living at the same time. So you got to choose the right runway, which I think real estate is a great career.
It's tangible.
We kind of have, slightly different, avenues for it, but it's a great business. I love it. And it's exciting because you get to meet new people. And we were talking about there's some characters out there that you get to meet. So that makes it fresh. And so, yeah, find something passionate that you want to dig into and keep going.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I would agree. Sometimes the stuff that sounds cliche, it exists for a reason. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that. Where can people reach out to you if they're interested in buying real estate, commercial real estate, or interested in selling an apartment building, or just learning more about real estate investing in St. Louis and potentially, working with you as a consultant?
Yeah. Always happy to talk about the market, even if you're not like looking to buy or sell. So if anybody's looking, we always like to chat and just kind of tell you what we're thinking and what we're seeing. Our website, salientrealtygroup.com, is a great place to start. All of our emails are on there. You can reach me there. I'm on Twitter. I'm not super active, but I'm on there. I read a lot of stuff on there. So I'm like a lurker, as they call it. But I think that's probably the best spot. And, shoot me an email, or text.
Yeah, we'll link your email. We can link your number if you want.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
We'll put it all in the description.
Yeah.
You briefly touched on it before we end. I got to ask if you can share anything else. You said you have a super cool project you're working on. You can't, release the information just yet. Can you give any hints?
I can give some hints. It's painful because I'm really excited about it, and it's going to be a really unique, I think, pretty iconic project here in St. Louis. But it's a very large scale redevelopment, and I'll give a size range to not give too many things away. But it's somewhere between 750,000 square feet to over 1 million, and it will be a very large scale project that will most likely be mixed use because it's just the scale of it. It'll most likely be a lot of apartments, retail. There could be hotel components. So it's really cool. It'll be really cool for this particular pocket of St. Louis. And I don't know when this is airing, so maybe it'll get announced by then or not. I'm not sure. But for now, we'll keep it anonymous. Yeah. But we're really excited about it. It has historic tax credits in it. So that kind of is a nice piece for us to kind of share some expertise on, but we're looking forward to it. I know that's like annoying for people, listening. If they're really interested, call me and we'll see what we can share.
Well, if it's out by the time this episode is out, we'll put that in the description as well.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, that works. That
All
works
right.
great.
Garen, appreciate your time. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Raj. It's been awesome.